I'll hand over to Gillian.
Thanks, Anne-Marie, and can I just add my welcome to you all to this seminar today. It's been a few years since I've been at an event here at Skainos, and it's so nice to come into a purpose-built building and be able to connect to everything so easily, so it's very nice to be here. So, just before we go into the findings that we're here to hear about bonfires, flags, cultural identity and so on, it's important to tell you a little bit just about the Life and Times survey. So the survey is an annual attitudinal survey of adults 18 years or older. It has run in Northern Ireland since 1998, and prior to that it ran as the Northern Ireland Social Attitudes Survey. So the survey has been running for a long time. Each year there's a random sample of the population, and in 2016, the findings we're talking about today, we had 1,208 achieved interviews with a response rate of 55%. The survey is funded on a modular basis, and we have funders ranging across academic funders, philanthropic sources, and of course government, and the questions that we're talking about today have been funded by the Executive Office. Since its inception, ARC has been concerned that the survey results are made as available as quickly and as freely as possible. So the full details of the surveys, the data sets and the results are all available online on the ARC website, and you can get anything you need to know there. I think oftentimes when we have Life and Times seminars, the first question at the end is about the value of public opinion surveys. So I'm going to counteract that by just saying that I think it's extremely important that public opinion is fed into public debate and into policy making. But the findings are from the general public across Northern Ireland. And we want to make sure that the general public voice is recorded and monitored and fed into public debate. But these are Northern Ireland-wide findings, and if you like, they're a measure of the overall climate. They're not the particular weather in smaller areas. So in an area like we're here now in East Belfast, or if we were in the northwest or other places, the findings, if you did a survey in a locality, might be slightly different. So what we've got here are the overall Northern Ireland population findings. Okay. So our aims for today are very simple. With the Commission on Flags, Identity, Culture and Tradition, and I'm very happy to see members of the Commission with us today, with the Commission being appointed in June 2016, we felt it was important to make sure that the findings in Life and Times were made easily available and would feed into that public debate. The data has been online for some months now, but we thought it was important to have a seminar and sort of make the data as easily accessible as possible. Within the survey, we have a number of questions that have been asked related to these issues over a number of years, and some of my colleagues have prepared earlier updates. Gráinne Kelly in 2014, Flying the Flag, and Duncan Morrow in 2015, in a general update on community relations, also referred to the flags issue. So we have a time series of information, and in some of the tables that I'll talk about, we look back over time at the trends and see how things are moving along. And the module also contained a few new questions as well. The other thing that's important to say is that the policy and legal framework around flags has been well documented by Paul Nolan and Dominic Ryan. So therefore, for this seminar, I have the very simple aim of just presenting the Life and Times findings on public attitudes towards bonfires, flags, cultural traditions and identity, and try to feed that into the debate. So before we move on to that, maybe if I could just move this up a little bit, make it easier, so I can see it instead of turning around. Perfect. So this is one of the questions that we use, that has been used since 1989. And respondents to the survey are asked, do they think relations between Protestants and Catholics are better than they were 5 years ago? And some of you who know this data well will have seen this table many times. But overall, we can see that public perception is on an upward trajectory. but when you look at the actual line, you can see that it is very volatile and reacts to what's happening in Northern Ireland at the time of the survey. So without going into too much detail, we can see way back in 1989, people were not very positive in terms of what they were reporting in terms of their perception of community relations. That improved as we go through the ceasefires up to the agreement, and then begin to plummet, and that's been well documented. Common to other peace processes, there can be a sort of euphoria at the time of the agreement, and then when things don't happen as quickly as we anticipate, people can be a bit despondent. So then increasing up to a high of the restored government in 2007, and then a downward trajectory dipping here in 2013, which was, Mike, are you not happy with the sound?
No, sound okay.
I keep moving, okay. Sorry, I thought you couldn't hear it. So in 2013, after the 2012 decision by Belfast City Council to only fly flags on designated days, and the protests that followed that, saw a dip in reported perceptions of community relations, and then it's been on the upward trend since then. So that's sort of the context. The red line is, we also run a Young Life and Times survey, so it's just to show you that young people's views are fairly similar to what we're finding with adults, and it's not the purpose of this seminar to go into those differences, but I just wanted to sort of set the scene and remind you of where we are. Okay. So the first figure that we have here is looking at reaction to markers, and by markers we mean murals, curb paintings and flags, or flags. Now these can all be used as markers of identity and may be, as we know, positively supported by some sections of the community and may provoke negative feelings for others. So this slide looks at the trends between 2004 and 2016. And remember, we're talking here about both Republican and Loyalist markers. So there are 4 lines. So the blue line is those who reported being annoyed by Loyalist markers, and the grey line is those who report being intimidated by Loyalist markers, and the red line is annoyed by Republican markers, or sorry, the orange line is annoyed by Republican markers, and the yellow line is those who are intimidated by Republican markers. So overall, we can see that there is a downward trend overall in terms of both annoyance and intimidation. But if we look first at those who report feeling intimidated by the previous year and those who report feeling annoyed, the trend is down. But you can see in 2013 that there is a bit of a spike in feelings of annoyance and intimidation for Loyalist markers. So if we are here. Okay. And then the more recent data in for the year 15-16 shows that there is a rise in annoyance for both Loyalist and Republican markers. Then if we leave the time series and move specifically to the year 2016, I'm wondering, I don't know if this is going to work. Maybe. Okay, that bit. Can you hear now with this behind? Yeah, okay. Right, I'm getting evil glare from the back of the room. Okay, so we look at reaction to markers for 2016. We've got here in the first 2 columns Republican murals, curb paintings or flags, and on the right hand columns we have Loyalist murals, curb paintings or flags. So the first thing, if we look at the first line highlighted in blue, we can see that overall 9% of our respondents have been intimidated by Republican markers, but almost a quarter, 24%, have felt annoyed by Republican markers. The trend is similar for respondents' views on Loyalist markers, slightly higher. 13% of the respondents report being intimidated by Loyalist markers, and 29% report being annoyed. So when we look at the results by religion, there is little difference in relation to Republican markers, but when we look at loyalist markers, there are noticeable differences. So, just see. So when we look at the loyalist markers, you can see that Catholic population respondents were twice as likely to feel intimidated as were Protestant respondents, so 19% versus 8%. It's interesting looking at this by religion, because what we see is that similar proportions of Protestants have negative feelings, that is, they feel intimidated or annoyed about loyalist emblems as they do about Republican markers or emblems, but in contrast, Catholic feeling is stronger against loyalist markers than it is against Republican markers. So there's a difference recorded between the two religious groupings. Okay. So then if we move on to talk about overall annoyance at markers, I think one of the really interesting things here is that we find that 2/3 of respondents are not reporting being annoyed at all by either markers. Now, sometimes in the public debate that's forgotten about, and we focus only on those who have a sense of being intimidated or annoyed. But of the population of Northern Ireland who took part in our survey, we find 2/3 are not reporting being annoyed at all. And if you look down through the different groupings, you can see that the figure is around that for all the groups, and rises up to 71% for those who report not being unionist or nationalist. Then if we look at annoyance, how many of us have been annoyed by both loyalist and Republican markers? So you can find that almost 20% are reporting being annoyed by both, which again is an interesting finding. 24% of those who claim to be unionist report being annoyed by both, and 24% of those who claim to be Northern Irish claim to be assert that they have been annoyed by both Republican and loyalist markers. Okay, let me see. Now, when we look then individually at just Republican markers, who professes to have been annoyed just by Republican markers, we find 4%, but for loyalist markers that rises up to 10%. So there are differences, significant differences between the different groupings in terms of their levels of annoyance at markers across Northern Ireland. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next area, which is specifically looking at flags and lampposts. And this is not flags in public buildings, which we'll come to in a minute. This is flags and lampposts. So overall, 48% support the flying of flags and lampposts throughout Northern Ireland on special dates for particular celebrations. But findings are very split, because we have 34% of our respondents who are opposed to the flying of flags and lampposts throughout Northern Ireland on special dates. I should say here that the questions about flags and lampposts follow those about markers, Republican and loyalist markers. And it may be that many of our respondents are thinking purely about Republican or loyalist flags. But I was reminded during the summer, when there was debates in South Belfast around GAA flags, that of course there are other flags that are flown on lampposts, and I know that there is an issue around where the boundaries of these rules and protocols lie, and what what's going on. So it may be that some of our respondents were not just thinking about loyalist and Republican flags, and that's just important to acknowledge. So opinion then is very clearly split: 48% overall support, 34% opposed. But like the previous slides, we do find difference between the different groups. So the highest level of support, so this figure is just showing support for flying of flags on lampposts, And the group with the highest reported support is the Unionist community, 69% supporting flag flying, British 65%, and this drops right down to 34% for those who claim to be Irish. So again, we see a split in findings and significant differences between the groups. Now, often in the public debate, oh, sorry, I forgot to say one thing. Let me just go back. In addition to those findings that I've just discussed, we also looked at age group, and here we did find significant differences between age groups. The youngest age group, those who were 18 to 24 years, were most supportive, so 56% of them were supportive of the flying of flags and lampposts, with the 55 to 64-year-olds most opposed at 46%. The other thing we looked at in preparing for the update was if there were any rural-urban differences, and we found significant differences for this particular variable, with those people living in an urban area more likely to be opposed to the flying of flags and lampposts, 37%, versus their rural counterparts at 29%. So often the debate focuses not just on the flying of flags, but on the timely removal of flags. So a question is asked about if flags appear on lampposts, I would like them all taken down straight away, even if this causes trouble. And here again, we find split findings. So overall, 45% are supportive of flags being taken down straight away, even if this causes trouble, and 33% are opposed to that. So the people who are most supportive, and given the earlier findings, this won't be a big surprise, the people who are most supportive are Catholics, 58%, Nationalists, 62%, and Irish respondents at 60%. We also looked at this in terms of age group, and we found that it was older people who are most supportive of having the flags taken down straight away, even if this causes trouble. So the 55 to 64-year-old age group, 57% of them were supportive of the flags being taken down. And people who lived in rural areas were more likely to agree that flags should be taken down straight away, even if this causes trouble. 49% rural compared with 43% urban. So now we move on to flags in public buildings. And some might say that the decision by Belfast City Council in 2012 has sparked this current concentration or focus of attention on this. So what we find here, and we've asked this question a number of times, is that overall support is growing for flag flying on designated days only. So that has risen up to now 59% from 51% in 2014. And the converse of that is also true, that the percentage of those who would like to see flags flying all the time has decreased. It's now at 20%, and this has come down from 24% in 2014. A lot of this change seems to be driven by changes within the Protestant community, who are becoming more supportive of flag flying on designated days only, as opposed to having flags flying all the time. So for the Protestant community, support for designated days only is at 56%, and that has, sorry, let me just see. Oh, yes, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong line. That's gone up from 51%. And similarly, the percentage of 38% of Protestants who would like to see the flags flying all the time has gone down from 43%. So there's been some movement, particularly in that area. Okay. So then we have some questions about bonfires. These are new questions that haven't been asked before in the Life and Time survey, and we only have 2 questions because we're limited due to space in terms of what we can ask, but I think it is important to try to get some baseline information. Now, we all know that bonfires have been a form of cultural expression and tradition down through the years, typically in July and August. They've often been a source of contention, and certainly in the last number of years tensions have been very high. In the research update we refer to tensions in Belfast and in Derry, Londonderry, but of course, as one of my students reminded me just the other day, there are bonfires across Northern Ireland, and for many of them may not cause much tension, but there are tensions in other places outside the two major centres of population, and that's important to acknowledge. So the sorts of issues around bonfires are everything from the siting of bonfires, what's burnt on them, whose responsibility it is, hazardous materials, the burning of flags, effigies or other emblems. There are a lot of different issues. So we asked first, are bonfires, do you agree or disagree that bonfires are a legitimate form of cultural celebration? And again, very divided figures, 42% agree, 33% disagree. But here, for the first time, I'll refer to the neither grouping, because we have, over 20% of people who don't really know the answer to that question, which is quite high for attitudinal surveys and these sorts of questions. There's a large percentage in the neither agree nor disagree category. When you look at differences by religion, you can see that the Protestant community is much more likely to agree that bonfires are a legitimate form of cultural celebration, 56% versus 24% for Catholics. The single highest group is the Unionist community at 67%, and the British people who claim a British identity at 60%. We also looked at this by urban-rural, and what we found is that people who live in urban areas are more likely to agree that bonfires are a legitimate form of cultural celebration. So the last question that we have is about responsibility for bonfires. So we asked how much you agreed or disagreed that bonfire organisers should be held to account if there is property damage or injuries as a result of their bonfires. And for the first time, perhaps in this presentation, we have very clear findings, with 86% agreeing or strongly agreeing that it's the bonfire organiser's responsibility. And I think maybe that is not a surprising finding, but I think it's very good to have that finding documented at this stage, given the discussions last year, particularly in the media around responsibility and so on. Okay. So really, that takes me through to just concluding points, and I have no idea of time because I forgot to look, am I? Okay, good. Okay, so basically, the key points that we wanted to flag up, and you may have others from what we've said and from what you know, we found 2/3 of NILT respondents had not felt intimidated by Loyalist or Republican markers in the last year. However, significant minorities, 35% of Catholics and 32% of Protestants, have felt annoyed by markers of identity in the past year. We found 48% of NILT respondents support the flying of flags on lampposts throughout Northern Ireland on special dates for particular celebrations, but 34% are against it. And opinion was again split about whether flags should be taken down straight away, even if this causes trouble. 45% of respondents agreed, while 33% disagreed. Now, 20% of respondents feel that the Union flag should be flown from public buildings all the time. 14% think that it should never be flown, but 59% support flying the Union flag on designated days on public buildings. And this is the highest that we've recorded, that particular variable. 42% think that bonfires are a legitimate form of cultural expression, 33% disagree, and 9 out of 10 think that bonfire organisers should be held to account if there's property damage or injuries as a result of their bonfires, and only 5% disagree with that. So that's really the findings as we found them.